The morning she was taken, the sun had barely cleared the edge of the world. Clara Boone stood at the edge of the corral, sleeves rolled, hat low over her eyes, watching her husband drive a fence post deeper into the frostbitten earth. Behind them, the cabin stood small and worn, built with hands that hadn't known comfort but had clawed it from the dirt all the same. The smell of horse sweat, cedar, and coffee clung to her like the memory of a better time. The world was quiet, save for the wind and the groan of old wood. She didn't hear the riders at first, just a crow's cry, sharp as a warning. Then came hooves, fast and hard, the kind of gallop that didn't mean neighborly visit or lost cattle. She turned and saw dust rising from the ridge. 4 riders, maybe 5, men who wore their coats like skins and their guns like mouths. James dropped the sledge and shouted, but they were on him before he could raise his rifle. Clara reached for her shotgun by the post rail, but something slammed into her from behind, and the world went sideways. Dirt filled her mouth. A boot crushed her spine. She heard James call her name like a dying prayer before it turned to a scream. They didn't kill him outright. They wanted her to watch. That much she understood when the tallest one grabbed her by the hair and yanked her up. He had teeth like rusted nails and eyes the color of dry bone. His knife glinted once. James went still after that. The tall one smiled, and it wasn't a smile. "You just bought yourself a trip, girl." They tied her hands and slung her over a saddle like she was meat. As the homestead vanished behind the dust, Clara didn't cry. She stared back at the speck where her husband lay split open, and something inside her went very quiet. They took her north into the wooded hills past Dead Elk Crossing. The land there was mean, thick with pine and shadow. Nights came early. The men called themselves the Withrow Gang, though none of them bore the same name. The tall one was called Marrow. The others were Flint, Hasker, Little Joe, and a mute called Birch who smiled too often. They camped in a burned-out hunting lodge and chained her in a root cellar that stank of blood and wet fur. For weeks they used her as they pleased. There were no questions, no pity, just hunger and hands and the soft thunder of boots on rotten wood. When they were done, they left her alone in the dark with only the rats and the memory of James's blood sinking into cold dirt. Clara didn't scream after the 3rd night. She listened. She learned their rhythms, who drank first, who argued loudest, who cleaned his gun and who didn't. The snow came early that year. By late October, the hills were shrouded in white and the gang grew meaner. Food was low, tempers short. That's when Clara began to speak again, soft and slow, to the rats first, then to herself. Names, directions, weaknesses. She whispered her plan like it was a lullaby. She knew they would let their guard down. They already thought she was broken. Birch liked to leave the cellar hatch half-latched, as if daring her to try. One night, when the wind howled loud enough to drown her breath, she pressed her fingers into the rotting mortar between the stones and worked one free. She didn't eat for 2 days, saving her strength. She waited until they were drunk and the fire crackled loud. Then she killed Birch with the rock. He didn't make much noise. His smile stayed even as his skull cracked. She took his knife, his coat, and the boots off his dead feet. She buried him in the woodpile behind the lodge and waited another day before the next step. She was no fighter. She was a rancher's wife who'd nursed calves in the spring and harvested beans in the fall. But she was also James Boone's woman, and James had taught her how to gut a deer and skin it clean. That skill transferred. Next was Little Joe. He liked to wander into the trees to piss and drink alone. Clara followed him in silence, knife wrapped in rags to muffle the metal. She took his throat and his liquor, then set his body beneath a frost-covered spruce. When the others found him the next day, they blamed wolves. 2 gone, 3 left. Morrow began to suspect, but not enough. He kept her chained tighter and beat her harder, trying to squeeze the truth from her. But Clara just looked at him with a stillness that unsettled even him. She waited until he turned his back and flung hot ashes in his eyes. She didn't kill him then. She wanted him to suffer. Instead, she left him half-blind and screaming while she ran. She made it 6 miles through the snow before Flint and Hasker caught her. They dragged her back, laughing, but the laughter felt forced. Something had shifted. She saw it in their eyes. The certainty was gone. And Clara had learned how pain tasted. She swallowed it like whiskey and spat it back like fire. They chained her again, starved her for 4 days. That was their final mistake. On the fifth night, the wind died and the silence grew heavy. She waited until Hasker came to mock her, bowl of gruel in hand, pistol at his hip. He opened the cellar hatch and lined in. She drove a splintered piece of wood into his throat, took his pistol, shot him twice to be sure. When Flint came running, she was already at the top of the steps. She shot him through the belly and left him crawling in the snow. Only Marrow remained. He had run. She followed, no coat, no food, just the pistol, a knife, and the cold fire in her chest. She tracked him east, across the divide, into lands James had once called godless. The trail led into scorched valleys and jagged ridges. Along the way, she stitched her wounds with pine needles and thread torn from the hem of her dress. She ate snow, roots, and once a bird she caught with her bare hands. Weeks passed, she stopped keeping time. The landscape turned to dust again, and she knew she was near home. But not yet. Morrow had holed up in an old mining shack south of Red Hollow. Locals said a madman lived there, half-blind, scarred, muttering about a ghost woman with rat eyes and bleeding hands. Clara waited until night. Then she knocked on the door with her pistol. The door swung inward with a groan. Lamplight spilled out, dull and yellow, slicing through the black like a wound. Inside, the air stank of sweat, oil, and fear. Morrow stood at the center of it all, his back to the stove, pistol in hand. His left eye was clouded, scarred from the ash Clara had thrown weeks ago. The skin around it had blistered and hardened into a pale welt, pulsing like something alive beneath. He held his gun steady, but his lip twitched. She didn't speak, neither did he. For one long breath, they stared at each other through the open frame, two figures cut from the same violence, shadow-bound and hollow-eyed. Snow fell in silence behind her. A flake landed on the edge of her pistol and melted. Then Morrow fired. The shot split the dark, burned past her left cheek. She flinched but held her ground. He fired again, wild this time, the bullet punching a hole through the door frame inches from her hip. Clara stepped inside. She aimed for the center of his chest. He was fast, but desperation made him clumsy. She grazed his arm with the first shot. The second caught him in the leg. He collapsed backward, knocking over the lantern. The light went out. The cabin plunged into shadow. Clara moved in silence. She learned the rhythm of breath, the pause before a man bleeds too fast to move. When he fumbled for his second gun under the cot, she was already there, boot pressed against his neck. "You left me in the ground," she said. He tried to answer. She pressed harder. "You killed my husband. You treated me like something you'd drag behind a horse." Morrow's good eye rolled up. "You think this makes you whole?" "No," she whispered, "but it makes you gone." She slit his throat slow, let him feel it. Then she sat beside his body until the blood cooled. When she left, she didn't look back. It took her 4 more days to reach the canyon pass. She cut across dry gullies and followed the deer trails she and James had once used to gather wild onions. Her body burned with hunger and old bruises. Her limbs were thinner now, her cheeks hollow, but the strength that carried her was marrow-deep. When she reached Boone Hollow, the wind stopped. The cabin still stood. The barn was half-collapsed from snow. A coyote bolted when she stepped onto the porch. Bloodstains had long faded from the dirt outside. The world had moved on, but her grief had waited, patient as bone. Inside, everything was as they left it. Clara dropped the pistol onto the table and sat. For the first time in months, she let her breath out and didn't pull it back in jagged. The silence was no longer her enemy. It was James's voice in the grain of the wood, in the steady creak of the rafters, in the worn places her hands had shaped with work. But peace wasn't part of it, not yet. Word of her return spread quicker than fire on dry wheat. By week's end, Sheriff Tull came riding up with 2 deputies. He had kind eyes, but a spine made of excuses. Clara offered him coffee and nothing more. When he asked about the Withrow gang, she handed him a sack with 5 things inside: 2 pistols, a knife, a folded shirt, and a severed finger. Tull didn't ask for details. She buried James beneath the cottonwood by the creek, marked with stone and a single iron horseshoe. The inscription was carved by hand. He gave everything, I took the rest. The weeks that followed were quieter. The cabin needed mending. So did the fences, the roof, her ribs. A neighbor named Lydia came by with bread and a bottle of cheap whiskey. Clara accepted both but spoke little. There were nights she didn't sleep, only sat by the stove cleaning her weapons with the methodical calm of a woman waiting for the next storm. Because it wasn't done. There were whispers even then. That Morrow had once ridden with someone worse. A man named Everard Slint, who used to own slaves down in Texas before the war and now ran a camp of killers in the mountain basin west of Mudstone. It was said he was the one who sent the Withrow gang after Boone Hollow in the first place. For land, for revenge, for something buried deep that Clara didn't yet understand. So she began to ask, quietly, carefully. She rode to the rail camp by Gallows Notch and spoke with a cook who'd seen Slint's men sell stolen livestock under false names. She found a drifter in Hollow Creek who owed Morrow money and remembered the name Slint like a nail pressed to his tongue. Every road she followed led to deeper rot. Slint's men worked under false sheriffs, hired out for lynchings and land grabs. They dressed their violence in paper and law, but the blood was always the same. One evening, a rider came to her gate, Mexican, older, with a scar like a fishhook under one eye, called himself Ruiz. He said he'd seen what Slint did to a village near the Rio Grande, said the screams were still in his ears. He looked Clara over once and nodded. "You got the eyes of a ghost," he told her. "If you ride for him, I'll ride with you." She didn't answer then, but 3 days later she packed a saddlebag with bullets and dried meat. She left the ranch to Lydia's care, rode out under a sky as wide and empty as the years she'd lost. She was no longer just a rancher's wife. She was the last storm rolling over the mountain, slow and cold and full of iron. They crossed into the basin under a new moon. Clara rode Laid, Ruiz at her flank, and behind them came 2 others, a tracker named Belden who never spoke above a whisper, and a Ute woman called Mercy, who once lit fire to a soldier's barracks with only oil and a prayer. They said little on the trail. Vengeance needs no conversation. The country west of Mudstone was raw and broken, gouged by mining greed and left to rot. Rusted equipment lay half-buried in weeds. Old shafts yawned like graves in the hillsides. The map Belden carried marked a place called Briar Cut, an old way station turned fortress, where Slint ran his men like a kingdom of shadows. It was said the ones who went in either joined or vanished. Clara didn't plan to vanish. They made camp 2 miles out, concealed by a stand of dead junipers. From there they watched the smoke rise, counted the guards, marked shifts and weak points. Slint's outpost had walls of sawed logs, 2 towers with rifles, and a gate too thick to break without fire or cannon. So they didn't plan to break, they planned to bleed it out. Ruiz found a shallow stream half a mile north, upstream from where the outpost drew its water. That night, Mercy ground nightshade into a black paste and stirred it in. They waited 2 more days as bellies turned and bowels failed. In that time, Clara cut down a sentry who strayed too far from his post. She took his coat and badge, and with Belden's help, they peeled the name from his satchel, W. Gibbons. She wore his face like a lie. On the 3rd night, she walked through the front gate under Gibbons's name. The sickness had dulled them, eyes sunken, guns still slung but hands slower. She passed beneath torchlight, heart steady, boots sinking into the mud like it had always known her weight. Inside, the compound was worse than she imagined. Rows of lean-tos in cages, women and boys penned like cattle. A man with no ears stirred ashes in a barrel. Somewhere, someone sang low and broken. She found Slint in the chapel. It wasn't a church, not really. Just a wooden room with broken pews and a cross blackened by smoke. He stood before it like a priest, long coat dusted with ash, white hair tied back in a rawhide band. His hands were clasped behind him, the way men do when they want to appear calm. "You're not Gibbons," he said, before turning. Clara didn't reach for her gun, not yet. She stepped closer, just enough for the light to show her face. "No," she said, "but you knew I was coming." Slint smiled with one side of his mouth. The other was frozen, twisted by an old burn. "I knew someone would, you Boone's widow." "Was." He nodded. He put up a fight, took 2 men with him, waste of a good rifle. She moved then, quick sure, not to shoot, not yet. She drove the heel of her hand into his throat. He staggered, knocked a chair aside, drew steel from his belt, but she was faster. Her knife caught his palm, split it to the wrist. Guards came, 2, maybe 3. She ducked behind the pulpit, fired once. Belden was already through the rear window. Ruiz came through the chapel door with his shotgun howling. Mercy set fire to the hay stores. The compound became chaos. Gunfire cracked across the yard. The sick rose from their tents, confused and staggering. A horse bolted into the firelight. Slint vanished into the smoke, bleeding and cursing. Clara chased him, past the stables, past the line of chained prisoners now free and running wild. She caught him near the well. He climbed the stones, tried to escape into the forest beyond, but his leg failed. He lay in the dirt, face to the sky, chest heaving. "Please," he rasped. Clara knelt beside him. "You remember my face." "I remember all of them." She believed him, that was his sin. He remembered and still chose to ruin. She didn't answer. She pressed the barrel to his heart and pulled the trigger, not once, twice. Then a 3rd time for the one still in cages. The body twitched, stilled. Dawn came slow. The compound burned behind them. They didn't stay to bury the dead. Let the flames do that. Mercy rode south with a group of freed girls, one of them no older than Clara had been when she first came to Boone Hollow. Belden vanished into the forest. Ruiz remained. They stood together on the ridge, smoke curling behind them. "You got what you came for?" he asked. Clara looked toward the valley, the far ridge, the mountains beyond. "No," she said, "but I got what he deserved." They rode in silence. By week's end, Clara returned alone to the homestead. No one asked where she'd been. They saw it in the way she moved, slower but stronger. They saw it in her hands, not shaking. In her eyes, no longer looking for mercy, only truth. She rebuilt, she tilled, she tended the grave. She grew tomatoes by the fence where James once whittled in the evenings. The land stayed hard, the winters cruel, but no men came riding with chains or fire. The land had learned her name. Spring came without apology, the way it always did in Boone Hollow, sudden, wet, and loud with thaw. The snow bled off into the gullies, bringing bones up with it. Clara found a femur in the south pasture, smooth and white as soap. She buried it without ceremony. The homestead was hers again, not just in name, but in shape. The fence posts stood straight. The roof no longer leaked. 3 goats wandered the yard, brought down from a trading post in Whetstone Ridge. She named them after flowers she'd never seen, magnolia, iris, and rue. She did not laugh often, but sometimes at dusk she would hum low while milking, eyes on the tree line. It wasn't over. A letter came that June, folded twice, sealed in wax, stamped with no mark. She slit it open with a kitchen knife and read it by lantern. no greeting, just 6 words written in a careful, slanted hand. Heard you left Slint in the dirt. Clara read it 3 times. There was no signature, but she knew. The letter came from someone Slint had served, or someone who'd watched him die. Trouble doesn't vanish, it steps back, watches. She burned the letter and packed her rifle. The trail took her north this time, through ridges she'd never ridden and valleys full of birdsong and rot. She stopped in mining towns that stank of sweat and sulfur, slept in barns, under wagon beds, once beneath a butcher's tarp beside a dog that didn't bark. People spoke of her now, but in pieces. A woman who moved like silence, who left outlaws gutted in the snow, who rode with ghosts. She let the myth grow. In Cold Bend, she found a preacher with no church who ran messages between camps. He'd seen Slint once, years ago, bowing to a woman in black lace with inked hands and eyes that watched like mirrors. Said she came from back east, from Carolina maybe, or farther. Called herself Mother Hale. Ran a house in the mountains where killers were taught not just to shoot, but to disappear. Where scars were currency, and the price for betrayal was drawn in meat. Clara asked him where. He didn't know, but he gave her something better, a name spoken in whispers, Hollow Grave. A place that wasn't on maps. Belden found her 2 weeks later in a broken-down mill outside of Fort Reeve. He smelled of smoke and blood and said nothing until the fire was lit. Then, over a tin of beans, he offered a single sentence. They tried to kill Ruiz. Clara didn't blink. Where? Outside Lost Cross, same riders, black coats, no brand. She doused the fire, packed what she needed, and left before daylight. Hollow Grave sat between cliffs like a secret kept too long. No road led to it. No smoke rose from its chimneys. But it was there, hidden in a cut of the mountains, stone buildings folded into the earth, windows black as coal seams. Mercy had called it once years ago, but even she hadn't found it. Clara did. She waited until dark, slipped in through the bones of a collapsed watchtower. Inside, Hollow Grave pulsed with a strange quiet. Figures moved in the courtyards, women, some hooded, some scarred. No one laughed, no one hurried. The walls were etched with scripture in a language she couldn't read. She was seen, of course. They let her in. A man met her at the gate, dressed in wool and bearing a knife on each hip. He asked no questions, offered no threats. Simply nodded and said, "She's expecting you." Mother Hale was older than Clara imagined, not frail but sharp. Her skin was like paper that had been folded many times. Her eyes were as pale as cloudlight and rimmed in coal. She sat beneath a hanging bundle of dried sage and opened her hands like someone greeting an old wound. "So," she said, "you're the Boone widow." Clara didn't sit. "I came for the ones who sent Marrow, who hired Slint, who thought they could grind us under like cornmeal." Mother Hale laughed once, not cruel, almost fond. "They didn't send him," she said. "They laced him. There's a difference." Clara stepped forward, slow. "Is that supposed to matter to me?" "No," Hale said, "but it will." The older woman leaned forward. Her voice was dry and deep. "Slint was a dog, a wild one. I kept him off my land mostly. But some men feed strays and call it favor. Others feed them and don't ask where the bones come from." Clara kept her hands close to her sides. Her fingertips brushed steel. "You run this place. I feed it, tend it. We are what the world made us. You teach murder." "I teach survival," Hale said, rising now. Her frame was slight but coiled like twine. "You think you're different. Your ledger is soaked, girl. You just didn't get paid for it." Clara stared, cold and long. "You kill for coin," she said. "I kill for ghosts." Mother Hale smiled. "So did I once." Silence filled the space between them like water rising. Then you know I won't stop, Clara said. Not until the chain breaks all the way back. Mother Hale nodded slowly. Then you're not done yet. She gestured to a wall of shelves lined with ledgers. Names, dates, symbols, codes. In there, she said, you'll find the man who paid Slint, the one who pointed him at Boone Hollow. He doesn't know you yet, but he's waiting. Clara opened the book, ran her finger down until she found it. One line, written in fine ink, underlined in red. Eldon Sharp, Cold Iron Holdings, Cedar Prairie. She closed the book, buckled it to her saddlebag. Mother Hale offered her a glass of water. She refused. That night, Clara rode out of Hollow Grave with a map in her head and thunder in her ribs. Cedar Prairie lay on the edge of the known world, past wheat fields that burned gold in the sun and towns so knew their names were still misspelled on signposts. But Cold Iron Holdings had sunk its teeth deep, built rail lines and fences, pushed out homesteaders with paper writs and men on payroll who wore tin stars without oaths. Eldon Sharp didn't run a gang. He ran a company. Clara rode into town alone, coat dusty, rifle wrapped in oilcloth behind her saddle. She'd cut her hair to the jaw, wore her hat low, and kept her voice lower. No one recognized her, not at first. The streets of Cedar Prairie were wide and bright. Children ran barefoot. A church bell rang twice. She watched a banker shake hands with a man who looked too rich to trust his own boots. Sharp's name was on everything, the feed store, the grain mill, even the orphanage. She went there first. The orphanage stood whitewashed and prim behind wrought iron gates, clean curtains in the windows. A girl no older than 9 swept the walk with practiced grace. Clara stopped her with a glance. Sharp owned this place. The girl hesitated. He funds it. Clara nodded once. You got a sister. No, ma'am. You do now. Go find her. Don't come back tonight. The girl blinked, then ran. Clara walked through the gate. Inside, the building was quiet, too quiet. She moved through the halls, boots barely whispering over pine wood until she found the office. Mahogany desk, globe, a ledger open to names, ages, shipments. A shipment. She thumbed the edge and found it, transport lists, not of grain or goods, but of children, moved from prairie to mine towns. No guardians named, no records beyond weights and ages. Clara's stomach went tight. There was a mirror on the wall. She saw herself in it, not the shape she remembered, but a woman carved lean by fury, hands strong, eyes rimmed in something cold enough to cut steel. She turned. Eldon Sharp stood in the doorway. He was clean-shaven, tall, soft in the way of men who have never had to climb anything they couldn't buy. A gold watch chain gleamed at his vest. You must be the widow, he said. Clara didn't answer. He stepped in, shut the door behind him. You've killed my men, Slint, Marrow, the rest. That was sloppy. She watched his hand drift toward the drawer on the desk. You sent them. I bought them, same as I buy cattle or land. You were never the target, just a stone in the furrow. Clara took one step forward. Boone Hollow was our land. He scoffed. It was in our way. That ridge holds coal, enough to power 3 towns. You and your husband were squatters. Sentiment doesn't change law. She didn't draw. Not yet. You ever hold a dying man? She asked. Feel his blood get cold on your hands? I hire people for that, he said. She drew. One shot through the heart, no speech, no warning. He died with a half-smile still on his lips, like he couldn't believe someone had told him no. She burned the orphanage ledger in the church brazier. Then she went to the sheriff's office, set Sharp's pistol and badge on the desk, told them what he did, left before they could say a word. There were fires that night, some lit by her, some by others tired of being quiet. By dawn, the cold iron sign hung twisted in the dirt. By noon, a rider came looking for her with an offer of peace. She said nothing, just saddled her horse and rode west. Years passed. Boone Hollow grew quiet again. A new cabin rose beside the old, built stronger, windowed wide to catch the sun. Children played there, not hers, but under her watch. Lydia came back, so did Mercy. Ruiz wrote twice a year, always signing with the same phrase. Still breathing, still riding. Clara Boone grew older, not softer. She planted apple trees along the creek, hung her rifle above the mantel, taught the children how to trap, how to track, how to skin clean and lie true when needed. When they asked her if the stories were real, she said no. They were worse. And on the grave beneath the cottonwood, the stones still read. He gave everything, I took the rest. The wind blew, the canyon held its silence. Justice had passed through, wearing a woman's name.